Hey everybody, I'm John from American Eagle Plumbing. Today we're going to be replacing a pressure reducing valve, and out here in Texas they're in the ground often. So we're going to be digging up this area right in here, and while I have the hole dug, I'm going to replace the house meter valve that's right in this bucket right here, and then I'm going to be replacing the PVC water shutoff valve as well to my irrigation, or to the irrigation. And the reason why we're replacing the pressure reducing valve is this regulates the pressure that goes into the home. So you're either going to have one or two things to know that this device here has failed. So the first is you're going to have really high water pressure. So you might notice that in your showers. In one instance, I had a client that had 125 psi to their home. And then the other way you're going to notice is if you're using your fixtures and then someone else uses something like the dishwasher or the washing machine, or if somebody else hops in the shower at the same time, and you're going to notice a dramatic drop in pressure in your shower. So you should really only have 1 or 2 psi pressure differential when another fixture is used. So if you have anything greater than that, you're probably in need of needing a pressure reducing valve. So the next step in this process is we got to dig this all up and open up all the piping and expose it so we can cut it out and replace it. A lot of times these water lines are about a foot to 18 inches in the ground, but the ground is hard. On this particular job, I'm doing a little over digging because I'm adding in a couple extra shutoff valves or replacing them, because what's there is PVC, and I'm going to replace that piping with some 1-inch PEX. All right, got it all carved out, so hopefully this won't go too bad. Take it out in nice big chunks so when we're done, we can make this look good. Set all this grass off to the side so we can put it back when we're done. Get these covers out of the way. Got to over dig your hole so when we turn the water off and cut the water lines, the water has a place to go so you don't get that in your pipe. Some nice dirt that's actually in here. You're supposed to fill it with sand, which is what this is. Makes it a little easier to dig. Often it's clay and rocky. This isn't too bad. Here we go, we got some clay over here. There's our pipe. Starting to expose the top of it. Usually your pressure reducing valve is going to last, from what I've seen, about 3 to 5 years. And a lot of that is because it's buried in the ground, and I don't have any proof per se to back it up, but I think the minerals in the ground really attack the housing of the product. Now that I got everything exposed, we're going to shut the water off. So the meter is located in here. I'm going to take this cover off, and I got myself a curb key right here. I'm just going to turn the main meter off because we're going to be cutting this piping here in a minute. Now, a little trick that works out really good. So if you have a shutoff valve inside the house that would be behind your water softener, it's a good idea to go ahead and shut that off, because if you don't, you're going to get when you cut this pipe, you're going to get all the water coming out from the house. It'll drain back into this hole. So we're still going to get water when we cut it, but it's not going to be as much because I have gone ahead and shut that valve off right behind the water softener. So as we get started, we're going to just go ahead and make a cut and get this starting to drain. Doesn't really matter where in this area. So this line here serves the irrigation. We're going to be replacing this little portion right here, and the main thing is going to be from this valve up to this pressure reducing valve. That's the main thing, but we're going to kind of reconfigure and get rid of some of this PVC while we've got this exposed. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this line again. And that way I can start on threading. Should really grab a Sawzall. There we go. All right, so now stuff is separated and I can start on threading things. I'm gonna use a pair of channel locks, and we're just gonna unthread this stuff. I'm gonna cut this pipe back a little bit more so it unthreads a little easier. This is really thin wall PVC. This is Schedule 20 PVC. If we're gonna put PVC in the ground, I recommend at least Schedule 40, so it's a heavier weight, thicker wall, if you will, of PVC. So that's just really thin. It's more brittle, but it's cheaper. So that's why it gets put in. So I'm going to unthread this from the meter and get rid of the PVC meter valve. All right, so then now it's completely disconnected from the meter right here. And one of the reasons I don't really like about these guys is that even though this one's somewhat reasonable to turn, they seize up and it becomes impossible. And sometimes even if you get them closed, you might snap the handle trying to open it back up. So it's just not, over a long term, it's not a very reliable valve. So in here, we're going to go ahead and disconnect. This is the irrigation backflow. That's what we're disconnecting. Again, all this stuff is thin wall. That is super thin. So when we put it back, we're going to put back something that's higher quality. It's going to last longer. You got to cut back some of this insulation in here to expose the threads. And then we're going to disconnect the PVC in this backflow. So even in here, this is a good example. As soon as I get this insulation off. So this is something that I see quite a lot of if there was a yard leak. So here's the brass, and this is it's called a PVC male adapter threaded into here. Now, if you look at, we'll take this apart first so you can see the difference. I'm gonna get back and work on this pressure reducing valve here. So I'm going to unthread this, and then I'm going to show you what the difference is. So this is the Schedule 80 nipple. Now, if you're paying attention, I've said a bunch of numbers: Schedule 20, Schedule 40, and then Schedule 80. So it's just talking about the thickness of the PVC. So this is a Schedule 4, and this is a Schedule 20. I'm gonna cut these threads off so you can see the difference, but you can see it's way thicker in the wall thickness. So what it should be, getting back to my point, What it should be is this: if you're going to use PVC and if you're going to use threads like this, it needs to be, to last longer, it needs to be this gray Schedule 80 nipple. It's going to be the thicker threads here, so they're not going to have a propensity to snap. Because when I see water leaks, often it's right where those threads are. They get really weak and brittle. And then here in Texas, the ground shifts and moves quite a bit. So those male adapters just snap right off because they're very, very thin. All right, so we're going to go ahead and remove this, because we're going to replace it with some different. We're going to replace it with PEX is what we're going to replace it with. But we're going to get this out of here. So this is what we're getting rid of. And again, like this is 3/4, so it's a different size, but it's still considerably thinner. When I'm talking thickness, I'm talking about this area right in here. So it makes a big difference when you thread into brass, and when that ground moves, it makes anything stronger is going to be helpful here in Texas. Got to break out the big guns to take this thing off. Sometimes that brass on brass sometimes seizes a little bit when it's left in the earth. So I'm not expecting this to unspin super easy. Here we go. Well, not too bad. Definitely had a lot worse. So the reason I'm spinning this instead of cutting it is there's a male adapter here on this piece of PEX that I'm going to repurpose when I put everything back together. It's still in good condition, so there's no reason to cut it out. There we go. So as you can see, we're still getting a little bit of water, but if I were to have that valve open in the house, I'd be getting, this whole thing would fill up with water and I'd have to bail it out. But this is very, very manageable to deal with. Now that we got everything removed, and at some point we're going to have to bail out some water, but we're going to start repiping this. So I got this kind of prefab because it's in a little tight spot and I'm never going to be able to fit my crimper in there. So I've gone ahead and I've pre-crimped my male adapter. So now, and I've pipe doped and Teflon taped it. So I'm going to go ahead and slip this through here and thread it right into my backflow. And then once that catches, there we go. Let's go ahead and get that tightened up. It's a real knuckle smasher is what this is. Alright, there we go. Nice and tight. And I've already gone ahead and prefabbed a couple fittings. I got my meter valve, and then this T is going to go over and feed the irrigation. That was what we just were working on. And then on the back side is the pressure reducing valve, or to the house. So this will feed the pressure reducing valve and then I'll go off to the house. So this is going to go right on the meter, and just going to put a little pipe dope on there. Pipe dope and Teflon tape, they're just thread sealant. They allow the threads to get nice and snug. There's just some old Teflon tape. hand tight, and then we'll put some wrenches on it. There we go. Alright, get this nice and snug. It'd be helpful if I had my wrenches. There we go, the right way. Because I prefabbed it, I might have to make an adjustment, but I think that looks pretty good. When working with pipe dope, it tends to get over a lot of different things, so. So the next step is we're gonna get our pressure reducing valve prepped. So this is the new one. And here you can see there's an arrow, there's a directional arrow. And you put that in the way of the way you want your water to go. So in this case, it's going to go this direction. There's even one on this side. So you can't mess it up as long as you know which direction the water is going. So it's going to go somewhere, it's going to go in this vicinity right here. But we're going to put in some adapters on this side, and then we're going to reuse the adapter that's sitting there. So we'll get this prepped out and get it installed. Now that we got this all prepped up, I got my male adapter into the other side of the pressure reducing valve. In a moment, we'll actually be removing this. And I'll show you what that looks like. It just has a rubber gasket and it's a union. And that union is going to come in pretty handy here after we get this valve installed. But for now, we're just going to keep it on there so we don't lose it or lose that gasket that you saw. So I'm going to thread this end into this male adapter. And again, we're just going to do hand tight. And then we'll go ahead and, as you can see here, our arrow is facing towards the house. So that is the direction of flow that we want. And go ahead and tighten this up. Just make this thing stand up straight and that should be good. Alright. There we go. Now all we got to do is put our PEX in. I'm going to just take a tape measure. It's going to be a little easier instead of trying to get my big piece of PEX in there. And all I'm going to do is just measure from the face of this fitting to the face of this other one. Right at 15 inches. Go ahead and cut this, mark it with my finger. Take my PEX cutter. Get that cut. Now this style of PEX uses 2 stainless steel crimp rings. And they just slip over the outside of the pipe. As you can see, there's a little hole right here that tells you that it's set. Can't go any further. Put it in on the other side. Now in this case, there, so I having a hard time on the right side getting that in, so this is where this union is going to come in super handy. So we're just going to unthread it, make sure our gasket remains. Slip this in place. And now look at how that lines up perfect. Get this pre-threaded before we crimp those rings. So that again, we don't lose our gasket. We don't want to lose that. Hand tight that. And this is our crimper, so it just slips over the fitting. And that's connected. Then we'll go over to this other one. Do the same thing. There we go. So our pressure reducing valve is installed, and now all we got to do is connect our irrigation. So on this install, the irrigation is before the pressure reducing valve. I've seen it where everything is ran off the pressure reducing valve, so your irrigation may have issues sometimes as well. That's a third indicator, I guess, that you have a bad pressure reducing valve. The downside to this install is that if you have high pressure, you could end up breaking your irrigation heads. But if you're going to have good pressure, you're never going to have an issue. So I've seen it ran both ways. I don't think there's really a right or wrong. It's just the way this one is. So again, I'm going to just take my tape measure, make sure that's coming out as straight as possible. Looks like we got 14 1/4. It's our 3/4 pipe, so we'll measure 14 3/4. And take my handy dandy pick tool, which I can operate with one hand, open it up, get that cut. Now in this case, the crimp ring over here is already on the fitting, so we just need one to go over to this adapter. We'll slide that on. Make sure that's pushed on all the way. And this one on all the way. So those two are done. And then we'll just... So I got all this done, and genius here forgot to put in the shutoff valve like I talked about. I had it sitting right here. So not a big deal. This is what happens sometimes. Even plumbers mess up and make mistakes. And this is one of those times. But it's a real easy fix. So what we need to do is we're going to actually on-thread this. And then we're going to end up having to shorten this because we're going to put this valve right in here for the irrigation. So we got to take this out, and then we'll just have to put in a coupling into this piece of pipe. You do this long enough, you can kind of feel it pop out when you're moving the pipe around. So there we go. We got our house shutoff valve. We got our shutoff valve for the irrigation. And then over here, we got the pressure reducing valve right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn the water on before we backfill, make sure there's no leaks. Turn it back onto the house. And we'll turn it back on to our backflow or irrigation. Make sure there's no leaks there. Double check all our fittings are crimped. They're all crimped. Everything's threaded in. So we'll go ahead and grab our meter key and then go into our meter box. Now, one thing when you're looking at this meter, see there's a hole right here, and it's actually lined up with a hole underneath. So if you don't pay your water bill, the city will come out and put a special pin in it and lock your meter. That's what that's there for. So I'm going to just stick this on there. And we're going to turn it on the right way until it stops. There we go. So now the water is passing through the meter, and it's all the way up to this valve here. So we're going to go ahead and turn this on. And this is going to head in on, turn the water on to the shutoff valve that I have off in the garage behind the water softener. So I got my pressure gauge. You can buy these gauges for 10 to 12 bucks at Home Depot. It goes all the way up to 200 psi, but it goes right on the edge end of your hose bib. So we're going to go ahead and thread this on to the hose bib, and then once we get it nice and tight, we'll turn it on. So there we go. We'll turn it on. So look at that. It's 45 psi, which is exactly what I thought it was going to be. And now we need to go back over to that pressure reducing valve, and we're going to adjust it because we want that black line right there all the way up to 60. All right, so here we are back over at our pressure reducing valve. So it's been on for a few minutes. There's no leak. So once we get this pressure adjusted, we're going to go ahead and backfill this. Now, this pressure reducing valve, so if you, there's a little slot right here for a screwdriver. When you screw it down, it's going to increase the water pressure, and then when you back it off, it's going to decrease it. So this has a little tag right here, and right near the bottom, it has a range between 25 and 75 psi. Now, if this device ever goes outside of that range, such as over 80 psi, it means that this device has failed. One can go ahead and adjust the water pressure back into that range, but the device itself from the manufacturer has failed. So I've done this a few times, so we're going to go ahead and check to see where our pressure's at. Should be right around 60 psi. Let's go take a look. Here we are back over at our gauge, and we're sitting right at 61 psi, which is pretty perfect. So now we can go ahead and tighten that locking nut on the pressure reducing valve and backfill. And then we have to do one more thing that's very important when you replace the pressure reducing valve, and I'll explain that in a minute. All right, so now that we got our water perfect and it's at 60 psi, we are going to check our expansion tank. Now, most expansion tanks are going to be right above the water heater. This one, however, is up in the attic. So this house has a tankless water heater, so it's just above the tankless water on the cold water piping system, which is also just fine. So I have shut the water back off and drained the system. You don't want to take this off without doing that. I'm going to loosen this up, and then I'm going to remove this, and what we're going to do is up here there's a Schrader valve, so I'm going to remove this cover on top of the tank, and there's a Schrader valve, and we're going to check the air pressure, because what most people miss is balancing out your system. So in this tank there's a bladder that the water comes into at the bottom, and then on the top there's air pushes down on that bladder. And what you want to do is you want to equalize that to whatever water pressure you have coming into your home. So in this case, this house is 60 psi. So we want to make sure when we take this off, there's 60 psi of air inside this tank. I'm going to install this water shutoff valve. It's just a PEX valve. And so what we're going to do, I'm going to cut this out. And then once we get the tank mounted, we'll cut that to the right size. So we're going to put our stainless steel sleeve in, make sure that our valve does not hit the plywood right there, and we can spin and adjust this valve once it's all crimped in place. All right, so now in the future, this expansion tank is serviceable without shutting off the whole house, and we can change that out. So this is the reason why we're putting the valve here. So expansion tank is set at 60 psi air. So this is still a good tank. It doesn't need to be replaced. And we can go ahead and re-thread this fitting on. A little easier to do this way as opposed to having it in those straps. So we'll get this fitting threaded on and then reattach it to the straps. These expansion tanks should probably check them yearly. Make sure that they're not waterlogged. Check your water pressure yearly. Making sure that you don't have pre-existing or issues that happen because the water pressure can spike. The city really regulates the water pressure, and it's your responsibility as a homeowner to take care of your home. And part of that is also when you have plumbers out to your home, it's almost on them that they should be the ones checking it. So if you have a plumber out to your home, make sure that you have the plumber check your water pressure, whether it be annually or just at some point. You want to make sure that you're taking care of your investment. Now in place, now I can go ahead and crimp this. And retighten my straps. And that is the process of changing out a pressure reducing valve and an expansion tank. And hopefully you learned a thing or two. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and be great.